The sky over Mount Natagumo did not just turn dark, it turned a sick shade of green, before it cracked open like a broken plate. There was no warning thunder and no rising wind, just a sudden heavy pressure that made the air hard to breathe for miles. Birds fell from the trees mid-flight, their small hearts stopped by a wave of invisible poison that washed over the forest. The clouds swirled into a funnel that touched the highest peak of the mountain, and the solid rock instantly melted into hot liquid. A roar that sounded like the earth itself was screaming tore through the silence. It was not the cry of a demon or a wild beast, but something much angrier and much louder. The force of the impact flattened the ancient cedar trees for a mile in every direction, turning the dense forest into a wasteland of splintered wood and rising dust. In the center of the crater, a creature stood up from the smoking rubble. He was a mountain of green muscle taller than any man and wider than a bear. His skin pulsed with glowing veins that shed a strange light into the dark night. He looked at his huge hands, and then up at the moon, which looked different than the one he remembered. The air around him shimmered with heat. The man named Bruce Banner was gone, and deep inside his mind, he was screaming to be let out, but the door was locked. There was only the Hulk, and he was confused. Confusion for the Hulk always led to rage. A lower-rank demon patrolling the area sensed the overwhelming life force. It felt like a feast to the demon, a human with blood so rich it smelled like pure power. The demon moved through the shadows, its eyes hungry and its claws ready. It leaped from the wreckage of the trees, thinking it had found a large but foolish human to eat. The demon's claws raked across the green skin of the giant's back. The claws snapped. They broke against the skin like glass hitting a steel wall. The giant stopped breathing for a second. He turned his huge head slowly. The demon froze. It had felt fear before when facing the demon king Muzan. But this was different. This was not the fear of a boss or a master. This was the fear of a natural disaster like a volcano or a tsunami. The Hulk roared again, and the sound wave alone threw the demon backward, crashing it through 3 standing trees. The giant did not use a breathing technique or a sword. He did not use magic. He simply stepped forward, and the ground cracked under his bare foot. He was not part of this world's delicate balance between slayers and demons. He was a wrecking ball that had swung into a glass house. Far away in the butterfly mansion, the strongest sword fighters known as the Hashira felt the tremor in the earth. The master of the Demon Slayer Corps looked up from his garden, with his blind eyes wide open. He felt a shift in the wind that tasted like ash and metal. The delicate game of chess they had been playing for centuries had just been kicked away over. Something had arrived that followed no rules. The night was no longer safe for humans or for demons. The green monster looked at the broken demon and raised a fist that was the size of a boulder. The forest went silent as if holding its breath, waiting for the first strike of a war that nobody understood yet. The Hulk was home now. The dust settled slowly over the ruins of Mount Natagumo, but the silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. The forest, which usually teemed with the chittering of insects and the rustling of nocturnal predators, was now absolutely still. The only sound was the heavy wet breathing of the green Goliath standing in the center of the crater. The Hulk looked at his hands again, turning them over to inspect the green skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. He felt lighter here, as if gravity had loosened its grip, but the air tasted thin and lacked the chemical tang of the modern world he was used to. It smelled of pine resin and old blood. He snorted, and a plume of visible vapor shot from his nostrils, dissipating into the cool night air. The creature inside him, the man named Banner, was dormant, buried under layers of thick, confused rage. This was the Hulk's time. He took a step forward, and his foot sank deep into the loamy soil, crushing roots and stones alike. He did not know where he was, but he knew he wanted to be left alone. That was always the rule. Leave Hulk alone and Hulk does not smash. But the world never listened. From the shadows of the twisted trees, the mother spider demon watched with trembling hands. She was manipulating her puppets, the bodies of slain demon slayers twisted into unnatural shapes by her threads, but her control was wavering. She had felt the impact, the sheer kinetic force that had shaken the mountain to its roots. She had thought it was a punishment from Muzan. At first, a wrathful strike for some failure she had not yet realized. But this was not a demon. It felt like a beast, a wild animal with a soul like a furnace. Her instructions were to kill intruders to protect her family, but fear paralyzed her. She twitched her fingers, and 3 of her puppets jerked forward, their broken limbs dragging swords through the dirt. They rushed the green monster silently, their movements jerky and unnatural. The Hulk did not even turn his head. He sensed the movement, the displacement of air, and swatted his left hand out in a lazy, backhand motion. The blow connected with the first puppet, and the result was instant disintegration. The human body, even reinforced by demon magic, could not withstand the impact of a fist that had staggered gods. The puppet exploded into a mist of red and white bone shards. The other 2 puppets faltered, their strings severed by the sheer wind pressure of the strike. The mother spider demon gasped, her position instantly compromised by her own shock. The Hulk turned his eyes toward her hiding spot. His eyes were green orbs of irritation. He growled a low rumble that vibrated in her chest cavity. Suddenly, the trees to the Hulk's right exploded outward. The father spider demon, a hulking monstrosity with a spider's face and massive muscular arms, charged into the clearing. He was the brute enforcer of the family, the strongest physically. He roared a sound that usually froze the blood of any slayer, but to the Hulk, it sounded like a challenge. The father demon wound up a massive punch, his fist hardened by demon blood, art capable of crushing boulders. He struck the Hulk square in the jaw. The sound was like a sledgehammer hitting a solid anvil. A shockwave rippled out, blowing the dust away from their feet. The father demon grinned, expecting to see the intruder's head crushed or torn from his shoulders. But the green head had only turned slightly to the side. The Hulk slowly turned his face back to center. There was no bruise. There was no blood. There was only a tightening of the jaw muscles. The Hulk looked at the demon's fist, which was still pressed against his face, and then looked the demon in the eyes. The father demon felt a sensation he had never experienced before, a primal recognition that he was not the apex predator he thought he was. He tried to pull his hand back, but the Hulk's hand shot up and grabbed the demon's wrist. The grip was absolute. The bones in the father demon's wrist ground together, turning to powder under the pressure. The demon howled in pain and swung his other fist, but the Hulk caught that one too. With a grunt of exertion that sounded more like annoyance than effort, the Hulk pulled the demon's arms apart. The demon's physiology was tough, durable enough to withstand steel swords, but against the gamma-fuel strength of the Hulk, it was like wet paper. The father demon screamed as his shoulders were dislocated, and then with a wet tear, he was thrown bodily across the clearing. He smashed into a rock face, embedding himself 10 feet deep into the stone. He did not get up. Deeper in the forest, Tanjiro Kamado stopped dead in his tracks. He was running toward the scent of demons, his sword ready, but the smell had changed. The rot and sulfur of the demons were suddenly overpowered by a new scent. It was acrid and metallic, like lightning striking a copper mine. It tasted sour on his tongue and made his lungs burn. It was the smell of a storm contained in a bottle. Inosuke Hashira, who had been charging ahead with his usual reckless abandon, also stopped. The ball mask hid his expression, but his body language was tense. The hairs on his arms were standing up. He felt the vibration in the ground, a rhythmic thumping that was getting closer. It was a heartbeat, but it was slow and heavy, loud enough to be felt through the soles of his feet. Zenitsu Agatsuma was already on the ground, covering his ears. He could hear it, the sound of a roaring fire, the sound of muscles shifting like tectonic plates. It was the loudest thing he had ever heard, a sound of pure, unadulterated power that had no rhythm and no melody, just chaos. Tanjiro looked at Inosuke. Inosuke drew his chipped blades. He shouted that the king of the mountains had arrived and that he would challenge this new beast. Before Tanjiro could stop him, Inosuke launched himself toward the crater. Tanjiro cursed and sprinted after him, ignoring the burning sensation in his nose. In the clearing, the Hulk was inspecting the spider family's webs. He plucked a thread that was strung between two trees. It was sharp, deeper than a razor, and it sliced slightly into his thumb. A drop of neon green blood welled up. The Hulk frowned. He watched as the cut closed itself in a second, the skin knitting together without a scar. He was annoyed. The webs were sticky and sharp, a nuisance. He grabbed a handful of them and ripped them down, bringing the trees down with them. Then Inosuke burst into the clearing, screaming his challenge. Beast breathing fang of the third rip and devour. Inosuke came in low, his blades aiming for the Hulk's legs, intending to hamstring the giant. The jagged blades struck the green calves. Sparks flew. Actual sparks of yellow fire erupted where the Nichirin steel met the gamma-irradiated skin. The blades did not cut. They skidded off, leaving white scratches that faded instantly. Inosuke's momentum carried him forward, but the impact jarred his arms all the way to his shoulders. He flipped backward, landing in a crouch, his mask staring up at the towering figure. The Hulk looked down at the small man with the big head. He was confused again. Why were the little men attacking him? He snorted and kicked a cloud of dirt at Inosuke. Inosuke, enraged by the disrespect, charged again. This time he aimed for the stomach. The Hulk did not dodge. He simply tensed his abdominal muscles. Inosuke's swords hit the green wall and bent. The steel groaned under the stress. The Hulk reached down and flicked Inosuke with his middle finger. The motion was casual, like flicking a fly, but the force was catastrophic. It struck Inosuke in the chest. The Slayer's ribs cracked audibly, and he was launched backward faster than an arrow. He flew past Tanjiro, who had just arrived, and crashed through the trunk of a thick pine tree before tumbling to a halt 50 yards away. Tanjiro stared in horror. Inosuke was durable, incredibly so, but that casual flick had nearly killed him. Tanjiro gripped his sword, his knuckles white. He could see the creature clearly now. It was not a demon. It had no murderous aura, no scent of consumed humans. It smelled of anger, pure and simple anger, so old and deep it felt like the earth itself. But it was dangerous. Tanjiro took a breath, focusing his mind. Total concentration, water breathing. He needed to be fluid. He needed to deflect the power, not meet it head-on. He moved the water flowing around his blade in a visual manifestation of his spirit. Second form water wheel. He jumped, spinning in the air, his blade creating a circle of water aimed at the giant's neck. The Hulk saw the water, saw the boy spinning. He raised an arm to block. The blade struck the Hulk's forearm. The water splashed harmlessly against the green skin. The blade bit in perhaps an inch deep enough to draw blood, but the bone was impenetrable. The Hulk roared a blast of air that shattered Tanjiro's concentration. The water effect vanished. The Hulk swung his arm outward, smashing the flat of his fist into Tanjiro's side. Tanjiro saw it coming and tried to block with his sword hilt, but the force was overwhelming. He was sent skidding across the ground, digging furrows in the dirt with his feet until he hit a boulder. He coughed blood, his vision swimming. The creature was invincible. Its skin was harder than the hardest boulder Tanjiro had ever cut. High above, standing on threads that crisscrossed the sky, Rui the lower moon. Five looked down with a cold expression. He was irritated. His family was being dismantled. Father was broken, mother was hiding. And these slayers were failing to die properly. But this green thing was the real problem. It was disrupting his quiet life, his game of family. Rui lowered his hand. He would dissect this beast. He would carve it into pieces and see what made it so strong. Perhaps he could use its parts to make a new, better father. Rui moved his fingers, sending a net of razor-sharp threads descending on the Hulk. Cutting thread cage, the threads wrapped around the Hulk, tightening instantly. They were capable of cutting through diamond. They bit into the Hulk's flesh, slicing deep into his shoulders, his chest, his arms. Green blood poured out, sizzling where it touched the ground. The Hulk roared in pain. This hurt. It was not a blunt impact. It was 1,000 paper cuts deeper than bone. The pain triggered the spike. The adrenaline surged. The gamma radiation in his cells went critical. The Hulk's muscles swelled, expanding against the threads. His eyes began to glow brighter, a radioactive green that illuminated the forest. He screamed a sound that tore the vocal cords of the birds in the trees. With a violent expansion of his arms, he snapped the threads. The sound of the snapping threads was like gunshots. Rui's eyes widened. Those threads were his strongest. They should have diced the creature. The Hulk was breathing heavily now, his breath coming in ragged gasps that sounded like a steam engine. He looked up and saw the boy standing on the wires in the sky, the source of the pain. The Hulk bent his knees, cracking the bedrock beneath him. He leaped. He did not fly, but he jumped with such force that he defied gravity. He rocketed upward, a green missile aimed at the moon. Rui panicked. He threw up a defensive web, a wall of steel-hard threads. The Hulk crashed through it, leading with his face. The webs cut his skin, but he didn't care. He reached out and grabbed Rui by the ankle. The demon's small body felt fragile in his grasp. Gravity took hold and they fell together, crashing back down to the earth. The impact created a second smaller crater within the first. Rui coughed blood, his regeneration already working to heal his crushed ankle, but he was pinned. The Hulk loomed over him, a shadow blocking out the stars. Rui summoned his blood demon art, firing threads at point-blank range into the Hulk's face. The threads cut the Hulk's eyelids, his cheeks, his lips. The Hulk recoiled, roaring and covering his face. Rui scrambled backward, using the moment to put distance between them. He was terrified. This creature had no neck to slice, no weak point to exploit. It was just a block of violence. Suddenly, a figure appeared between them, moving with the speed of flowing water. Giyu Tomioka, the water Hashira, stood calm and collected his sword drawn. He had arrived just in time to see the green monster recover from the facial wounds. The cuts on the Hulk's face were already closing, the skin stitching itself back together in seconds. Giyu narrowed his eyes. Not a demon, no scent of ashes, but a threat to human life nonetheless. The Hulk, seeing a new challenger, wiped the blood from his eyes and charged. He threw a punch that would have leveled a building. Giyu took a deep breath. Water breathing, 11th form, dead calm. Everything became still. The air stopped moving. Giyu entered a state of perfect defense, negating the attack. He intercepted the Hulk's fist with the flat of his blade, diverting the kinetic energy, dispersing the shockwave into the ground around them. The ground shattered, but Giyu did not move. It was a perfect parry, but Giyu felt a crack in his sword. The blade, a masterpiece of smithing, had developed a hairline fracture from a single deflected blows. The Hulk, confused that his punch had been stopped, roared and brought his other fist down in a hammer blow. Giyu dodged, sliding sideways like a drop of water on a lotus leaf. He slashed at the Hulk's tendon, trying to immobilize him. The blade cut deep, but the muscle fibers were so dense, they trapped the sword for a fraction of a second. Giyu had to wrench the blade free, losing his balance for a microsecond. That was enough. The Hulk's backhand caught Giyu in the midsection. The armor of the Demon Slayer core held, but Giyu's ribs groaned. He was flung backward, skipping across the ground like a stone on a lake, until he recovered with a flip, landing on his feet, but sliding back 10 meters. He spat blood. This physical strength was beyond anything, even beyond Muzan's upper moons. It was physics-defying. From the tree line, a butterfly fluttered past. Shinobu Kocho landed gracefully on a high branch. She had been watching. She saw the brute strength and knew she could not match it. She was the weakest Hashira. Physically, she could not cut off a demon's head. But she did not need to cut. She needed to poison. This creature was biological. It bled. It breathed. Therefore, it could be poisoned. She smiled, her eyes cold and calculating. She launched herself into the air, her movements light and erratic, making her impossible to track. Insect-breathing butterfly, dance caprice. She moved faster than the Hulk could track, stinging him multiple times in rapid succession. Her blade, specially designed to inject wisteria poison, pierced the Hulk's neck, his trap muscles, his thigh. She injected a lethal dose, enough to kill 50 demons. She landed gracefully behind him, waiting for the poison to rot his insides. The Hulk paused. He slapped at his neck like he had been bitten by a mosquito. He felt the heat in his veins. The wisteria poison, a potent toxin to demons, was entering a system fueled by gamma radiation. Inside the Hulk's body, a war began on a cellular level. The poison tried to attack the cells to break down the proteins. The gamma-enhanced white blood cells identified the intruder and went into overdrive. The Hulk's veins turned purple, then black, then a blazing, angry neon green. His body temperature skyrocketed. The air around him began to shimmer with heat. The ground beneath his feet began to bake, turning to dry clay. The Hulk fell to one knee, clutching his throat. Shinobu smiled. It was working. But then the Hulk gagged. He coughed a deep, wet cough, and then he roared. But this roar was different. It was accompanied by a cloud of green mist. He expelled the metabolized poison from his system, forcing it out through his breath and his pores. The mist was acidic hot and radioactive. It washed over the area. The grass turned brown and withered instantly. The flowers on the trees wilted. Shinobu's eyes widened. She held her breath and leapt back, covering her mouth with her sleeve. The mist touched the sleeve of her haori, and the fabric began to disintegrate. The poison had not worked. It had only made him hotter. It had made him a walking reactor meltdown. The Hulk stood up, his skin steaming. He was angrier now. The pain was gone, replaced by a burning itch that made him want to tear the world apart. He looked at the small purple butterfly woman. She was fast, but he was done playing. He clapped his hands together. Thunderclap. A sonic boom exploded from his palms. The shockwave hit Shinobu mid-air. It was like being hit by a wall of solid air. Her eardrums ruptured. She was thrown out of the sky, crashing into the forest canopy. The trees splintered, breaking her fall, but she hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of her. The sun began to crest over the horizon. The first rays of dawn touched the top of the mountain. Rui, seeing the light, screamed in terror. He scrambled for the shadows, dragging his broken body into the darkness of the deep woods, abandoning his territory. The slayers paused, expecting the green monster to burn, to crumble into ash, as all monsters did when the sun rose. Tanjiro watched, shielding his eyes. Giyu watched, leaning on his cracked sword. The light hit the Hulk. He did not burn. He did not scream. The sunlight merely illuminated the vivid green of his skin, making him look even more godlike and terrifying. He squinted at the sun, shielding his eyes with a massive hand. He was not a creature of the night. He was a creature of science, born of a bomb, not a curse. The rules of the Demon Slayer world did not apply to him. The realization hit the Hashira like a physical blow. They were fighting something that had no weakness to the sun. If this was a demon, it was the ultimate demon, the one Muzan had been searching for, the perfect being. The Hulk looked around at the devastation. The forest was gone, replaced by a crater. The little men with swords were broken or scattered. The annoying bug woman was gone. The spider things were gone. He was still angry, but the immediate threat was gone. He felt the radiation pulsing under his skin, a restless energy that needed to go somewhere. He bent his legs and leapt again. This time he aimed for the distance away from the rising sun, away from the noise. He soared through the air, traversing miles in a single bound, a green comet arcing over the Japanese countryside. He landed miles away, shaking the earth one last time before disappearing into the next range of mountains. On Mount Natagumo, the silence returned, but it was a terrified silence. Tanjiro struggled to his feet, clutching his side. He looked at Giyu. Giyu looked back, his face pale. They had survived, but they had not won. They had simply been ignored. The message was clear. The hierarchy of power had shifted. A crow flew down, landing on Giyu's shoulder. It did not speak its usual reports. It was trembling. Giyu looked at the destruction, the melted rocks, the withered trees, the impossible footprints. He knew he had to report this to the Ubuyashiki estate immediately, but he didn't know how to describe what he had seen. A monster that broke swords with its skin. A monster that drank poison and breathed fire. A monster that walked in the sun. The war against Muzan had just become infinitely more complicated. And somewhere in the dark fortress of the Infinity Castle, the Biwa woman struck a chord that echoed with a strange discordance, alerting the Demon King that a piece of the board had moved on its own. The age of demons was over. The age of monsters had begun. The Hulk was loose in Japan, and nothing would ever be the same. The report arrived at the Ubuyashiki estate, not by Crow, but by the battered bodies of the survivors. Giyu Tomioka walked with a limp that he refused to acknowledge his haori, stained with mud, and the strange neon blood that had already faded into a radioactive scorch mark. Beside him, Shinobu Kocho looked pale, her usual mask of smiling detachment cracked by a genuine tremor in her hands. She had examined the residue on her blade, the remnants of the poison she'd injected into the monster, and what she found terrified her more than any demon art. The cellular structure of the creature was not biological in any sense. She understood. It was a chaotic storm of energy that constantly rewrote its own genetic code. It was cancer weaponized and given consciousness. Kagaya Ubuyashiki sat on the veranda, listening to their ragged breathing. His curse was spreading the purple veins, creeping further up his face, but his mind remained the sharpest weapon in the core. He listened to the description of the green giant who walked in the sunlight, who shattered Nichirin steel with his skin, and who breathed fire that was not fire but a poison light. Kagaya realized instantly that the war they had been fighting for 1,000 years had become irrelevant. Muzan Kibutsuji sought to conquer the sun. Now a being existed who had not only conquered it, but seemed to be fueled by an energy far greater than it. If Muzan consumed this creature, the world would not just end, it would be erased. Kagaya issued a command that had never been given in the history of the Demon Slayer Corps. He ordered the complete mobilization of every Hashira. not to hunt a demon, but to intercept a calamity. He knew they could not kill it. He only hoped they could steer it away from the cities. Deep within the shifting geometric labyrinth of the Infinity Castle, the air pressure dropped. Muzan Kibutsuji stood before his upper moons, his eyes burning with a manic intensity that made even Kokushibo, the upper rank one, grip the hilt of his sword uneasily. Muzan had seen what the spider family saw. He had access to their memories before their connection was severed. He saw the sun rise and touch the green skin. He saw the creature not dissolve but thrive. For a millennium, Muzan had lived in fear of the day, searching for the blue spider lily, desperate for a way to walk in the light. And now, a brute, a mindless beast of rage possessed the very gift Muzan believed was his divine right. He was not angry. He was obsessed. The order was given with a voice that sounded like grinding stones. Bring the creature to the castle alive. He did not care how many lower moons died. He did not care if the Demon Slayer Corps interfered. He wanted the genetic material of the Sun Conqueror. He dispatched Akaza, the upper rank 3, immediately. Akaza was chosen not just for his strength, but for his love of battle. Muzan knew the creature responded to violence. Akaza would draw it out. The Hulk had moved on. He did not know the geography of Japan. He only knew that he wanted to get away from the smell of burning ozone and the annoying stinging insects. He leapt across the landscape, crossing prefectures in minutes. He landed in a valley known for its rice paddies, a peaceful region, far removed from the usual demon activities. The impact of his landing destroyed an irrigation canal, flooding a dozen fields and ruining the harvest for 3 villages. He stood up, mud dripping from his massive frame, and sniffed the air. He smelled food. Not the raw metallic smell of the demon things, but real food. Rice, fish, smoke. His stomach roared a sound that echoed off the valley walls, terrifying the farmers who were tending their crops. He walked toward the nearest village, his footsteps shaking the thatched roofs. The villagers froze. They had heard stories of demons Oni that came in the night to eat flesh. But this was broad daylight. This was a giant green Oni, a deity of wrath manifested in the physical world. An elder ran forward waving a stick, shouting prayers to Buddha. The Hulk looked at the stick. He plucked it from the old man's hand and snapped it. He did not hurt the man. He just gently pushed him aside with a finger that was as thick as the man's arm. The Hulk walked into the village square. He saw a storehouse. He tore the doors off their hinges, not out of malice, but because he didn't know how to work the latch. Inside were sacks of rice. He grabbed a sack and poured the raw grain into his mouth, chewing it bag and all. It was dry and tasteless, but it filled the void. Panic spread like a wildfire. The villagers fled screaming, running into the woods, abandoning their homes. The local police force arrived, 2 men with simple sabers and a pistol. They fired at the giant. The bullets flattened against his skull and fell to the ground like coins. The Hulk ignored them until one bullet struck his ear, making a ringing sound. He turned and roared. The sound wave blew the roof off the police station. The officers collapsed, bleeding from their ears. The Hulk went back to eating. He was not a villain. He was a force of nature trying to survive in a world made of cardboard. But to the world, he was a catastrophe. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of blood and ozone. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the wind. Hashira arrived first. He had been patrolling a nearby district and had run himself to exhaustion to reach the reported location. He saw the devastation, the flooded fields, the ruined houses, the giant green monster sitting in the wreckage of the town square eating raw rice. Sanemi's blood boiled. He did not care about the reports of invincibility. He only saw a monster destroying the livelihood of innocent people. He drew his blade, his eyes wide with mania. Wind-breathing first form, dust whirlwind cutter. He launched himself at the Hulk, spinning like a cyclone. The attack was faster than sound, aimed directly at the Hulk's neck. The blade struck. It cut. Unlike Gyu's defensive strike, Sanemi's sheer ferocity and the sharpness of his wind-enhanced blade managed to slice through the outer layer of the Hulk's skin. A spray of neon green blood hit Sanemi's face. It burned. It felt like acid. Sanemi flinched but didn't stop. He landed on the roof of a nearby house and spat. The blood tasted like battery acid. The Hulk dropped the rice sack. He touched his neck. He looked at the green blood on his fingers. The confusion in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by the black dilation of pure rage. He turned to Sanemi. Kyojuro Rengoku arrived a second later, his flame haori snapping in the wind. He landed beside Sanemi, seeing the burn marks on the wind. Hashira's face. He sensed the heat radiating from the creature. It was not the heat of a fire, it was the heat of a star. Rengoku smiled his usual confident smile, but his eyes were deadly serious. He spoke loudly, telling the creature to surrender. The Hulk answered by picking up a stone mill wheel that weighed 2 tons and throwing it at them. Rengoku moved instantly. Flame-breathing fourth form. Blooming flame, undulation. He spun his sword, creating a vortex of fire that deflected the massive stone, shattering it into gravel. But the force of the impact pushed Rengoku back his boots, sliding through the dirt. The Hulk charged. He was fast, terrifyingly fast for his size. He closed the distance in a blink. Sanemi screamed a war cry and met him. Wind-breathing ninth form, Adaten Typhoon. He unleashed a vertical storm of slashes. They carved deep furrows into the Hulk's chest. But the Hulk didn't stop. He walked through the blades. The cuts healed as soon as they were made, the green light stitching the flesh together. The Hulk backhanded Sanemi. Sanemi blocked with his sword, but the blade shattered. The impact broke Sanemi's arm and sent him crashing through 3 houses. He lay in the rubble, coughing blood, his vision blurring not just from the impact, but from the radiation poisoning seeping into his wounds. Rengoku saw his comrade fall. The flame Hashira stepped forward, his spirit blazing. He knew he could not cut this thing. He had to burn it. He had to overwhelm it with such intense heat that it could not regenerate. Ninth form Rengoku. A devastating dash attack initiated from a high stance. The technique carved a deep trench in the ground, leaving a trail of fire. Rengoku became a human dragon of flame, crashing into the Hulk's sternum. The impact created a shockwave that flattened the rest of the village structures. Fire engulfed the green giant. For a moment, Rengoku thought he had done it. He stood panting, the heat of his own technique searing his lungs. But then, the fire turned green. The Hulk absorbed the energy. He inhaled the flames. He stood in the center of the inferno, his skin glowing brighter, his muscles expanding. The fire had not hurt him. It had fed him. The Hulk grabbed Rengoku by the head. Rengoku struggled his grip on his sword, failing. The Hulk lifted him up. Suddenly, the air shattered. A fist punched through the space between them, forcing the Hulk to drop Rengoku to block. Akaza had arrived. The upper rank 3 demon landed in a crouch, his compass needle deploying beneath him. Destructive death compass was needle. Akaza smiled a genuine joyous smile. He felt the battle spirit coming off the Hulk. It was not a stream. It was an ocean. It was infinite. Akaza had spent centuries looking for the ultimate opponent, and here he was. He ignored the Hashira. He ignored the sun, which was hidden behind the thick smoke of the burning village. He launched himself at the Hulk. The clash between Akaza and the Hulk was the moment the laws of the world broke. Akaza's punches were shockwaves capable of destroying organs from a distance. He struck the Hulk hundreds of times in a second. destructive death annihilation type. A barrage of punches that pounded the Hulk's chest and face. The Hulk staggered back. He was actually being pushed back. Akaza laughed maniacally. He punched the Hulk in the stomach, doubling him over. Then he kicked him in the chin, sending the giant into the air. Akaza jumped, meeting him in the sky. He clasped his hands together and hammered the Hulk back down to the earth. The Hulk hit the ground, creating a crater that swallowed the village square. Akaza landed on the edge of the crater, waiting for the giant to rise. He shouted for the creature to show him more, to fight harder. He wanted to see the technique. He wanted to see the martial art. But the Hulk had no martial art. He had only escalation. The Hulk stood up. He was larger now. The anger had triggered another growth spurt. The spikes on his shoulders were more pronounced. His eyes were no longer green orbs, but blinding white lights. He looked at Akaza. The demon was fast. The demon was strong. But the demon was annoying. The Hulk slammed his fists into the ground. Gamma seismic smash. The earth rippled like water. The tectonic plates beneath the village shifted. The ground split open, swallowing the ruins of the houses. Akaza lost his footing, his compass disrupted by the shifting terrain. The Hulk clapped his hands. The thunderclap was focused, directed entirely at Akaza. The air pressure dropped to 0 and then exploded. Akaza's body was torn apart. His arms were ripped from his sockets. His chest was caved in. He was blown backwards, skipping across the destroyed landscape until he hit a mountain range miles away. The Hulk roared at the distant mountain, challenging the demon to come back. Rengoku dragged himself over to Sanemi. The wind. Hashira was conscious, but barely. His skin was pale and he was vomiting. Rengoku looked at his own hands. They were trembling. He felt sick deep in his bones. It was the air. The air around the Hulk was toxic. The Geiger counter of the universe was screaming. The Hulk was a walking Chernobyl. Every second they spent near him, they were dying. The village was gone. The people who hadn't fled were buried. The land was poisoned. Rengoku realized with a heavy heart that they had failed. They had treated this as a fight. It was not a fight. It was a containment breach. Akaza regenerated. It took him longer than usual. The damage was not just physical. The cells of his body were confused, burning from the radiation. He healed, but the new flesh looked wrong, lumpy and discolored. He stood up, shaking with excitement and fear. He had found a ceiling. He had found something he could not punch to death. He prepared to run back to the fight, but a hand touched his shoulder. It was Kokushibo. The upper rank one had arrived silently. He looked at the distant green glow. He spoke softly. He told Akaza to stand down. This was not a warrior. This was a beast. And Muzan had changed his mind. They were not to capture it. They were to lure it. Muzan had sensed the radiation too. He realized that the creature's blood was too volatile. It would destroy the castle. It would kill Muzan from the inside. They needed to study it from afar. They needed to let it break the demon slayers first. The Hulk stood alone in the ruins of the village. The Hashira had retreated, carrying their wounded. The demons had vanished. The Hulk sat down. He was still hungry. The rice was gone, buried under the mud. He felt a deep sadness welling up under the rage. He didn't want to break the houses. He didn't want to hurt the little fireman. He just wanted to eat. He looked at his hands. They were covered in dust and blood. He waited for the sun to go down, hoping that the dark would bring some peace. But the radiation inside him kept him warm, kept him awake. He was an eternal engine of destruction, stranded in a world of paper lanterns. News of the Green Calamity reached Tokyo by the next morning. The government was in chaos. The army was being mobilized. But the Demon Slayer Corps knew the truth. Modern weapons would do nothing. The master lay in his bed, his condition worsening. He realized that the balance of the world had not just tipped, it had been shattered. The demons were no longer the primary threat. The Hulk was a third pole in the world, a chaotic neutral force that threatened both sides equally. And the worst part was the sickness. Reports were coming in from the area surrounding the destroyed village. The plants were dying. The water was glowing. The people who had survived the initial attack were falling ill with a strange wasting disease. Their hair was falling out. Their skin was blistering. The Hulk brought not just death, but a plague of light. In the butterfly mansion, Shinobu worked feverishly. She analyzed the blood sample again. She realized the implications. If the Hulk continued to get angry, if he continued to release this energy, he would eventually sterilize the entire island of Japan. It wasn't about fighting him anymore. It was about calming him down. But how do you calm down a creature that views every movement as an attack? How do you soothe a storm? She looked at the other Hashira. Mitsuri Kanroji was crying quietly. Muchiro Tokito was staring at the ceiling, trying to grasp the magnitude of the situation. Gyomei Himejima was praying his beads, clicking rhythmically. They were the strongest swordsmen in history, and they were helpless. They needed a new strategy. They needed to stop being warriors and start being diplomats. But the language of the Hulk was violence, and they were fluent in nothing else. Far away in the mountains, the Hulk began to walk again. He was heading towards the lights, towards the big city, towards Tokyo. He remembered cities. Cities had food. Cities had places to hide. He didn't know that Tokyo in the Taisho-era was made of wood and paper. He didn't know that his mere presence would ignite the city like a box of matches. He just walked one heavy step at a time, leaving a footprint of radioactive glass in his wake. The irreversible catastrophe had happened. The world knew he existed, and the world was afraid. The era of secrecy was over. The era of the monster had arrived. The countdown to the end of Japan had begun. The smoke from the burning village in the north had not yet cleared when the ground began to tremble outside the capital. Tokyo, the bustling heart of the Taisho era, was a city caught between two worlds. Electric lights hummed alongside paper lanterns, and steam trains raced past rickshaws. But as the sun climbed high on the third day since the Green Calamity, a shadow fell over the western districts that had nothing to do with the weather. The Imperial Japanese Army had mobilized. This was no longer a secret war fought in the shadows by swordsmen and monsters. A giant green being was marching toward the emperor's seat, and the government had responded with the full might of its modernized military. Rows of heavy artillery cannons imported from the west lined the banks of the Arakawa River. Thousands of soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles dug trenches in the soft earth, their officers shouting orders through megaphones. They were confident. They had defeated foreign powers. They had modernized. They had steel and gunpowder. They did not know that they were bringing firecrackers to a nuclear test site. The Hulk walked down the Koshukaido highway. He was calm for the moment, but it was a fragile calm. The hunger was a constant gnawing ache in his belly, and the radiation burning under his skin made his skin itch maddeningly. He scratched his chest, leaving white furrows that glowed green before fading. He saw the city in the distance, a smudge of grey and brown against the horizon. It looked like a hive. Hives meant bees. Bees meant stinging. He frowned. He stopped walking as he saw the line of little green men blocking his path. They looked different from the swordmen. They held long metal sticks. The Hulk grunted and took a step forward. The order was given. Fire. The artillery cannons roared in unison. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap of man-made fury. Shells whistled through the air and slammed into the Hulk's position. The highway erupted in geysers of dirt and asphalt. Smoke obscured the target. The soldiers cheered. Nothing could survive a direct bombardment of that magnitude. The officers lowered their binoculars satisfied. But then the wind shifted. A massive hand waved through the smoke, dispersing it instantly. The Hulk stood there. He was brushing dust off his shoulder. He looked annoyed. The shells had not even broken his skin. The kinetic energy had been absorbed, fueling the reactor in his chest. His eyes began to glow. The soldiers stopped cheering. A collective gasp of horror ran down the trench line. The Hulk picked up a piece of the destroyed road, a slab of asphalt the size of a carriage. He threw it. It flew through the air like a frisbee, spinning with terrifying speed. It crashed into the artillery line, crushing 3 cannons and their crews instantly. The silence that followed was broken only by the screams of the dying. Then the rifles opened fire. Thousands of bullets pinged off the Hulk's chest like hail on a tin roof. He started to run. The ground shook with every step. He didn't run like a man. He ran like a charging rhino, head down, shoulders hunched, a battering ram of flesh. He crashed into the trench line. Bodies flew into the air. He did not punch, he simply ran through them. The sheer mass of his body, moving at 60 miles per hour, turned soldiers into mist. Tanks that had been brought up to the front were flipped over like toys, their treads spinning helplessly in the air. The Hulk grabbed the barrel of a tank and bent it into a knot, then kicked the machine into the river. Watching from a high ridge overlooking the slaughter, Gyomei Himejima wept. The stone Hashira, the strongest of the demon slayers, pressed his hands together, his prayer beads clicking furiously. He could feel the deaths. He could hear the heartbeats stopping. Beside him, Mitsuri Kanroji covered her mouth, her face pale. Obanai Iguro sat on a tree branch, his snake Kaburamaru hissing in agitation. They had been ordered to wait to let the army try. It was a political move, a way for the government to save face. But the cost was too high. Gyomei spoke, his voice deep and resonating like a temple bell. He said they could not wait anymore. He said the creature was not evil, but it was a disaster, and disasters had to be mitigated. Gyomei leapt from the ridge, falling hundreds of feet. He landed in the middle of the chaotic battlefield, directly in the Hulk's path. The ground cracked under his feet, but he did not waver. He stood 7 feet tall, a giant among men, but a child compared to the Hulk. The Hulk stopped. He saw the big man with the beads. This one was different. He didn't smell like fear. He smelled like incense and sorrow. The Hulk roared a challenge, blowing Gyomei's robes back. Gyomei did not draw a sword. He swung his massive flail, an axe, the spiked iron ball humming through the air. Stone breathing, second form, upper smash. He threw the flail. It wrapped around the Hulk's wrist. The chain pulled tight. Gyomei dug his heels in and pulled. For the first time since his arrival, the Hulk was halted by a human. The muscles in Gyomei's back bulged, tearing his uniform. He was the only human alive with the physical strength to even momentarily contest the Hulk. The Hulk looked at his trapped wrist. He tugged. Gyomei slid forward but held his ground. The Hulk growled and pulled harder. Gyomei roared, using a breathing technique to harden his muscles to the density of rock. The chain groaned. It was made of the highest grade scarlet ore forged under the sun, but it was being tested to its molecular limit. Obanai and Mitsuri joined the fray. Obanai moved like a serpent, winding through the battlefield, striking at the Hulk's eyes with his twisted blade. Serpent breathing first form, winding serpent slash. He cut the Hulk's eyelid. The Hulk blinked, shaking his head. Mitsuri danced in creating a ribbon of slashed air with her whip-like sword. Love-breathing third form cattle of shower. She struck the Hulk's joints, trying to sever tendons. but the Hulk was adapting. The radiation output increased. The air around them began to heat up. The soldiers who were still alive in the trenches began to vomit, collapsing not from injuries, but from acute radiation sickness. Guillaume felt it too. His skin felt like it was sunburned. His lungs burned with every breath of the stone breathing. He realized the trap. The stronger they breathed, the more poison they inhaled. This creature turned their greatest strength, their breathing techniques, against them. Suddenly, the shadows lengthened. The battlefield was already a scene of carnage, but now a new player entered the board. From the wreckage of a tank, a wooden dragon erupted. It was massive, snarling with a face of pure hatred. Zohakuten, the manifestation of Hantengu's hatred, had arrived. Muzan had sent the upper rank 4 not to save the humans but to protect the city. Tokyo was Muzan's feeding ground. If the Hulk destroyed it or poisoned it, the demons would starve. Zohakuten floated above the battlefield, beating drums on his back. He looked down at the Hulk with a sneer. He called the Hulk a bully, a villain who hurt the weak. The irony was lost on the demon. Zohakuten unleashed his blood demon art. Countless wooden dragons burst from the earth, wrapping around the Hulk, pinning him down. The wood was harder than steel, infused with demon magic. The Hulk roared, tearing at the roots. Zohakuten unleashed a sonic scream, compressed sound waves that pulverized the rock around the Hulk. The Hulk took the hit. His ears bled, but he smiled. A toothy, savage smile. Finally, something that could push back. The Hulk ripped his arms free, shattering the magical wood. He leapt at Zohakuten. The demon summoned more dragons, creating a wall of wood. The Hulk crashed through it. He grabbed one of the wooden dragons by the neck and bit it. He tore a chunk of the magical wood out with his teeth and spat it out. The radiation began to affect the demon magic. The wood started to rot. The cellular regeneration of the dragons failed. The green light from the Hulk was cancerous to the demon cells. Zohakuten felt a burning sensations in his real body, hidden miles away. The radiation was traveling through the magical link. The Hulk was not just fighting the avatar, he was poisoning the user. Zohakuten panicked. He unleashed his strongest attack, a combination of wind and lightning. The blast hit the Hulk in the chest, scorching his skin. The Hulk didn't flinch. He reached out and grabbed Zohakuten's ankle. The demon tried to phase away, but the Hulk's grip was physical and metaphysical. The anger was so potent, it anchored the demon to the spot. The Hulk slammed Zohakuten into the ground. Guillaume saw the opportunity. He swung his axe, aiming for the Hulk's neck while he was distracted. The heavy spiked axe struck the Hulk's cervical spine. It bit deeper than any blade before. The Hulk roared in genuine pain. He spun around, backhanding Guillaume. The stone Hashira blocked with the handle of his flail, but the force was too much. The handle bent, and Guillaume was sent flying, crashing into the ruins of a bridge. He struggled to rise. He was coughing blood and his vision was swimming. The radiation was eating him alive. He looked at his hands. The veins were turning purple. He knew he was dying, not from the blow, but from the air. Mitsuri screamed, seeing Guillaume fall. She charged, the Hulk, tears streaming down her face. She was faster than she had ever been. She slashed the Hulk's face, blinding him temporarily. But the Hulk was done with the insects. He clapped his hands again. The shockwave stripped the flesh from the bones of the dead soldiers nearby. Mitsuri was blown back, her haori, shredded, her skin bruised and burned. Obanai caught her, shielding her body, with his own taking the brunt of the heat. They tumbled together into a crater. The Hulk stood alone in the center of the devastation. The army was gone. The Slayers were broken. The demon was retreating, his wooden dragons withering into black ash. The Hulk looked at Tokyo. It was closer now. He could hear the sirens. He could smell the fear of 1,000,000 people. The hunger returned. He started walking again. In the Infinity Castle, Muzan felt Hantengu's pain. The upper moon was convulsing, his cells breaking down. Muzan severed the connection, instantly terrified that the radiation would transmit to him. He paced in his chambers. The plan had failed. The creature could not be stopped by force. It could not be stopped by magic. It was an inevitability. Muzan looked at his hands. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Demon King felt helpless. He realized he might have to do the unthinkable. He might have to leave Tokyo. He might have to abandon his territory and flee into the deep wilderness to wait for this storm to pass. But his pride anchored him. He would not run from a mindless beast. He ordered Nakimi to prepare the fortress. If the Hulk entered Tokyo, Muzan would bring the city into the Infinity Castle. He would trap the beast in an infinite dimension of shifting rooms. It was a desperate gamble. Back on the outskirts, the survivors regrouped. Gyome used his breathing to slow the poison, but he knew it was a losing battle. Shinobu Kocho arrived via the medical wagon she had been preparing. She wore a heavy mask and gloves. She looked at the devastation and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The radiation levels were lethal. She approached Gyome. She told him that fighting was useless. This was not a biological entity in the standard sense. It was a reactor. Every time they hit him, he leaked more radiation. They were killing the world by fighting him. Shinobu proposed a new plan. A plan that went against every instinct of a slayer. They had to stop fighting. They had to clear the path. They had to let him walk. If they engaged him in Tokyo, the battle would level the city and the radiation would make it uninhabitable for a century. They had to lure him through the city and out the other side to the ocean. The ocean was the only place vast enough to cool him down. But how to lure a god of rage? In the distance, a small figure walked onto the battlefield. It was not a slayer. It was not a soldier. It was a young girl holding a temari ball. It was Nezuko Kamado. She had broken free from her box during the chaos. She stood in the path of the Hulk. She did not have a weapon. She looked at the giant green monster. To her demon eyes, he looked like a blazing sun of angry energy. But beneath the anger, she smelled the sadness. The deep, lonely sadness of a man trapped in a cage. The Hulk stopped. He looked at the small demon girl. He raised a fist. Nezuko did not flinch. She grew in size, her demon form activating, but she did not attack. She simply kicked the ball toward him. The ball rolled across the cracked asphalt and tapped against the Hulk's giant toe. The Hulk looked at the ball. He looked at Nezuko. He was confused. Why wasn't she attacking? Why wasn't she running? He picked up the ball. It was small and fragile in his hand. He looked at Nezuko. She gestured for him to throw it back. The Hulk hesitated. The rage in his mind swirled, looking for a target. But there was no aggression here. Only a game. A child's game. Suddenly, a shot rang out. A surviving soldier, delirious with pain and fear, had fired his rifle. The bullet hit Nezuko in the shoulder. She cried out, falling back. The ball dropped from the Hulk's hand. The moment of connection shattered. The Hulk looked at the soldier. The rage returned, amplified 1,000 times. He had tried to play, and they hurt the small one. The Hulk roared a sound of pure heartbreak and fury. He slammed his fists into the ground. The shockwave caused the bridge to collapse. He turned his eyes toward Tokyo. No more games. He would smash the hive. He would smash the noise. He would smash everything until it was quiet. He began to run. Not a jog this time, a full sprint. The ground dissolved under his feet. He broke the sound barrier. The windows in the suburbs of Tokyo shattered as he approached. The Slayers watched helplessly as the green comet raced toward the most populated city in the east. Gyomei closed his blind eyes and prayed for the souls of the innocent. The act of escalation was over. The act of annihilation had begun. The Hulk was entering Tokyo and the world held its breath. In the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was evacuated to a bunker. The sky turned green. The clouds swirled. The air tasted of metal. The Hulk breached the city limits. He ran through a row of wooden houses, turning them into splinters without slowing down. He reached the first major intersection. People were running, screaming, crushing each other in the panic. The Hulk stopped. He was surrounded by noise. Sirens, screams, bells, whistles. It was too loud. He covered his ears and screamed back. His screams shattered the glass of every building within a mile. The Ginza district, the symbol of modern Japan, crumbled. Brick facades fell into the street. Streetcars derailed. The Hulk began to rampage. He punched a building and it collapsed. He threw a clock tower into a river. He was not hunting. He was thrashing. He was a drowning man fighting the water, but the water was a city of 2 million people. And in the shadows of the chaos, the demons watched. They saw the destruction and they saw opportunity. If the Hulk destroyed the government, the demons could rise from the ashes. But then the sickness hit them too. The lower-ranked demons hiding in the alleys began to melt. The radiation did not discriminate. It killed Slayer, soldier, civilian, and demon alike. The city of Tokyo was becoming a graveyard. The only thing that was alive was the Hulk, and he was the angel of death. From the east, a new presence approached. It was not human. It was not demon. It was something else. A large crow landed on a telephone wire that was sparking with electricity. The crow spoke with a voice that was not a bird's voice. It broadcast a message to the Slayers, a message from Tamayo, the demon doctor. She had been watching. She had a theory. The creature was fueled by anger, but anger was a biological response. It was hormonal. If they could not kill the body, they had to kill the mood. She had a drug she had been developing to turn demons back into humans. It was experimental. It was dangerous, but it was the only card left to play. She needed someone to inject it, someone fast enough to get close and strong enough to pierce the skin. The Slayers looked at each other. They were broken, poisoned, defeated. But Tanjiro Kamado, who had been carried to the rear, recovered consciousness. He stood up, clutching his sword. He nodded. He would do it. He would deliver the cure, or he would die trying. The stage was set for the final confrontation in the burning heart of Tokyo. The monster versus the boy, the rage versus the resolve, and the clock was ticking down to 0. The radiation levels were rising. If the Hulk wasn't stopped in the next hour, Tokyo would not just be destroyed, it would be a dead zone for 10,000 years. The city burning and the Hulk standing atop the ruins of the Ryunkaku skyscraper, roaring at the moon, daring the universe to send him something he couldn't break. The universe answered with silence and the soft falling of radioactive ash. The fires of Tokyo had ceased to rage not because they were extinguished, but because there was nothing left to burn. The Ryunkaku, the 12 stories tower, stood like a broken tombstone in a graveyard of ash. At its peak, the Hulk sat with his legs dangling over the edge, staring blankly at the smoke-choked sky. The green luminescence of his skin had dimmed to a sullen, pulsing throb like a dying coal. He was not resting. He was waiting. His mind was a fractured landscape where the man Bruce Banner wept in a cage of bone and the monster Hulk paced in a circle of fire. The rage had not subsided, but it had changed. It had curdled into a heavy, suffocating misery. The noise of the city was gone. The people were gone. The little men with the stinging metal bees were gone. There was only the heat and the sickness that leaked from him into the concrete and steel. Below him, the streets were littered with the dead, who showed no wounds, only the blistering red marks of acute radiation poisoning. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. In the cellar of a ruined bakery 3 blocks away, Tanjiro Kamado tightened the sash of his uniform. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from the cellular degradation attacking his nervous system. He coughed, and the blood that splattered onto the dusty floor was dark, almost black. Beside him, Zenitsu Agatsuma sat with his knees pulled to his chest. His hearing, usually a gift, was now a curse. He could hear the dying breaths of thousands of people. He could hear the blood boiling in their veins. But loudest of all, he could hear the heartbeat of the thing on the tower. It was slow and heavy like a war drum beating a retreat. Zenitsu looked at Tanjiro. He asked if they were really going to do this. He asked if there was any point in dying for a city that was already dead. Tanjiro looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear. He said they were not doing it for the city. They were doing it for the soul trapped inside the monster. Tanjiro had smelled it. Beneath the scent of ozone and gamma fire, he had smelled the tears of a human being. A scent of regret so profound it tasted like salt water. Tamayo appeared from the shadows. She was a ghost, pale and translucent, her demon physiology struggling to knit together cells that were being dismantled by the ambient radiation. She held a syringe made of tempered glass filled with a liquid that glowed a soft blue. It was not the cure for demons. It was a sedative, a concentrated extract of the blue spider lily mixed with wisteria and a chemical compound she had synthesized from the Hulk's own blood found on the battlefield. It was a theoretical bridge between biology and physics. She warned Tanjiro that the window of opportunity was microscopic. The creature's skin was impenetrable. They had to inject it into a soft tissue, the eyes, the inside of the mouth, or an open wound if one could be made. She handed the syringe to Tanjiro. Her fingers brushed his and he felt the coldness of her despair. She told him that if this failed, there would only be the end of history. Inosuke Hashira stood by the door. He was not wearing his boar mask. It had been lost in the fight with the wooden dragons. His face, usually pretty and feminine, was marred by burns and grime. He looked older. He didn't shout. He didn't brag. He just drew his chipped blades and said he would clear the path. Nezuko emerged from her box, which Tanjiro carried on his back. She was small in her child form. She looked at her brother and hummed a sound of comfort. She could heal burns, she could burn poison, but she could not fix the fundamental law of physics that was being violated. She took Tanjiro's hand. Her demon flesh was resistant to the radiation but not immune. She was the anchor. They moved out. The air in the street was thick and hot. It felt like walking through soup. Every breath was a labor. Tanjiro used total concentration, breathing constant, not to enhance his strength, but to filter the air to keep his heart beating against the pressure. They moved through the shadows of the ruins, avoiding the pockets of green fire that burned on the asphalt. They reached the base of the Ryunkaku. It was a twisted skeleton of brick and steel. The Hulk was 12 stories up. Zenitsu stopped. He grabbed Tanjiro's arm. He whispered that something else was here. Not a human, not the Hulk. Something cold. Something that sounded like a biwa strumming in the dark. Before Tanjiro could react, the space around them warped. The ruins of Tokyo folded in on themselves. Gravity shifted. The street became a wall. The sky became a floor. They were no longer in Asakusa. They were in the Infinity Castle. Muzan Kibutsuji had made his move. He had realized that he could not hunt the Hulk in the open. The risk of exposure was too high, so he had brought the battlefield to his domain where he controlled the physics. The Hulk roared as the tower he was sitting on shifted and dissolved into a labyrinth of wooden platforms and sliding doors. He fell tumbling through the dimensional shift, landing on a massive tatami platform suspended in an endless void. He stood up confused and angry. The smell of the city was gone, replaced by the smell of old wood and demon blood. He saw the Slayers standing on a platform opposite him. And then he saw Muzan. The Demon King stood on a higher platform, looking down with eyes that were vertical slits of crimson. He was not alone. Kokushibo stood at his right hand. Doma the upper rank too stood at his left, replacing the fallen Akaza. Muzan did not speak to the Slayers. He spoke to the Hulk. He offered a bargain. He offered a place where the sun never rose, a place where the Hulk could be a god of darkness, eternal and unchanging. The Hulk looked at the pale man in the suit. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of a man who thought he held the leash. The Hulk hated leashes. He picked up a massive wooden pillar and threw it at Muzan. Muzan flicked a finger. The pillar turned into dust before it reached him. Muzan sighed. He had hoped for intelligence. He would settle for biology. Muzan gestured. The Infinity Castle shifted. The platforms slammed together, forcing the Slayers and the Hulk into the same arena. It was a cage match. Muzan intended to let the Slayers weaken the Hulk, or distract him while he prepared the absorption ritual. Kokushibo drew his sword. The blade was long, covered in eyes, a grotesque mockery of a samurai's soul. Moon breathing, first form, dark moon, evening palace. He swung the blade. Dozens of crescent moon blades, chaotic and changing in size, flew toward the Hulk. The Hulk smashed them with his fists, but the moon blades were sharp and magical. They cut his skin. They sliced his eyes. The Hulk roared blindingly, swinging blindly. Tanjiro knew this was the moment. The chaos, the distraction. He looked at Inosuke and Zenitsu. They nodded. They knew the plan. Inosuke charged, screaming a war cry that lacked his usual joy, but carried a terrifying resolve. Beast breathing eighth, Fang explosive rush. He ignored defense. He threw himself at Kokushibo not to win, but to keep the upper moon away from the Hulk. Zenitsu vanished into a flash of yellow light. Thunder breathing, first form thunderclap, and flash Godspeed. He aimed not for the demons, but for the Hulk's legs. He needed to bring the giant down. The impact was like a lightning strike. The Hulk stumbled, one knee hitting the wooden floor. Tanjiro sprinted. He ran along the walls of the shifting castle, defying gravity. He held the syringe in a reverse grip. He aimed for the Hulk's neck, where the veins pulsed thick and green. But Doma was there. The ice demon intercepted him, smiling his beatific hollow smile. Blood demon art lotus ice. A cloud of freezing mist enveloped Tanjiro. The cold threatened to freeze the fluid in the syringe. Tanjiro grit his teeth. Dance of the fire god, setting sun. Transformation. He generated heat, turning his blade and his body into a conduit of solar energy. He melted the ice. He slashed through Doma's fan, severing the demon's fingers. Doma looked surprised. He hadn't expected the boy to be this fast. The radiation from the Hulk was weakening the demons too, slowing their regeneration. Tanjiro burst through the mist. The Hulk was rising, his eyes healing rapidly. He saw the boy. He remembered the boy, the water boy. The Hulk raised a fist to smash him. Tanjiro didn't dodge. He screamed. He screamed not a challenge but a plea. He screamed Bruce Banner's name. The Hulk froze. The fist stopped inches from Tanjiro's face. The wind from the punch blew Tanjiro's hair back. The name, the forbidden name. The name of the puny man. The Hulk looked at Tanjiro. In that split second of hesitation, Tanjiro saw the pupil of the Hulk's eye dilate. He saw a flicker of brown in the sea of green. He saw the man looking out. Tanjiro lunged. He didn't stab. He pressed the needle against the pulsing carotid artery. He used the breathing technique to focus all his strength into his thumb. He depressed the plunger. The glass needle tipped with diamond dust pierced the skin. The blue liquid shot into the Hulk's bloodstream. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Hulk did not fall asleep. He did not shrink. He stiffened. His back arched. A sound tore from his throat that was not a roar, but a shriek of biological agony. The blue serum met the green gamma blood. The science of the Demon Slayer world, based on herbalism and mysticism, collided with the science of the Marvel Universe, based on radiation and mutation. They were incompatible. The serum tried to rewrite the Hulk's DNA to suppress the transformation. The gamma radiation fought back by accelerating the mutation to survive. The Hulk began to change. His skin boiled. Patches of grey calcified armor erupted from his shoulders. Bone spikes burst from his elbows and knees. His size increased the muscle mass, doubling, expanding until his skin tore and reformed instantly. But the worst change was the energy. The green glow turned a sick, violent purple. The mixture of the blue spider lily and gamma had created a new isotope, a demon energy isotope. Muzan, watching from above, felt a thrill of terror. The creature was becoming a demon, but not a demon under his control. It was becoming a superdemon, a being of infinite growth, without the limitation of Muzan's cells. The Hulk turned his head. His face had elongated. His jaw had unhinged. He looked like a nightmare version of an Oni. He looked at Muzan, and he laughed, a deep guttural laugh that shook the foundations of the Infinity Castle. The Hulk leaped. He didn't just jump, he warped space. He appeared in front of Muzan instantly. Kokushibo tried to intervene, swinging his sword. The Hulk caught the blade. The blade that had cut through centuries of warriors shattered in the Hulk's grip. The Hulk backhanded Kokushibo. The upper rank one was vaporized, not killed. Vaporized. The kinetic impact turned his body into a mist of blood that was instantly burned away by the purple heat. Muzan panicked. For the first time in his existence, he felt the icy grip of true death. He lashed out with his whip arms, razors of bone and flesh. They struck the Hulk and broke. The Hulk grabbed Muzan by the throat. Muzan shapeshifted, turning into a mass of mouths and teeth trying to consume the Hulk's hand. The Hulk didn't care. The purple energy flowed from his hand into Muzan. This was the massive multiversal outcome. The Hulk was not just killing Muzan. He was infecting him. The gamma demon energy was rewriting Muzan's biology. Muzan screamed as his cells, the cells that were the progenitor of all demons, were overwritten by the chaotic code of the Hulk. The connection to all demons was hijacked. Every demon in Japan felt the shift. The voice in their head changed. It was no longer the cold whispering of Muzan. It was a roar of pure rage. Tanjiro watched in horror. The plan had failed. They had not cured the Hulk. They had created a god of monsters. The castle began to collapse. The reality marble could not sustain the energy output. The wooden platform splintered. The void tore open. They were falling back into the real world. They crashed back into the ruins of Tokyo. The impact leveled what was left of the Asakusa district. The dust rose in a mushroom cloud. Tanjiro lay on the ground, unable to move. His legs were broken. He looked up. The smoke cleared. Standing in the crater was a being that defied description. It stood 20 feet tall. Its skin was a dark purple green, heavily armored with bone plates. It had horns that curled like a bull's. Its eyes were burning white holes in reality. It held the limp body of Muzan Kibutsuji in one hand. Muzan was still alive, but he was small, shriveled, his power drained. The Hulk squeezed. Muzan popped like a grape. The Demon King was dead. The war was over. But the nightmare had just begun. The creature that had been the Hulk looked at the sky. The sun was setting. The moon was rising. It roared, and the moon turned red. The sheer psychic pressure of its rage was projecting onto the celestial bodies. The survivors of the Demon Slayer Corps looked at the creature. They realized with a sinking heart that they had traded a tyrant who wanted to live forever for a destroyer who wanted to burn everything. But then a small choice echoed. Deep inside the purple monster, the consciousness of Bruce Banner was not gone. The serum had failed to cure the Hulk, but it had awakened Banner. He was awake inside the cockpit of the monster. He saw what the Hulk saw. He saw the dead city. He saw the broken boy Tanjiro. He saw the fear. And for the first time, Banner did not try to suppress the Hulk. He did not try to fight the rage. He embraced it. He synchronized with it. The monster stopped roaring. It looked down at Tanjiro. The white eyes faded slightly, revealing a pupil. The creature raised a hand. Tanjiro flinched, expecting death. The creature pointed a finger at its own chest. Then it pointed at the horizon. It spoke. The voice was like tectonic plates grinding together, but the words were intelligible. Go. Away. It was a mercy. It was the only mercy Banner could wring out of the beast. The creature turned its back on the Slayers. It began to walk, not toward the remaining cities, but toward the ocean, toward the deepest parts of the trench. It sought isolation. It sought to cool the fire that was consuming it. The Slayers watched it go. The Demon King was dead, killed by an alien force. The demons were leaderless, many of them dying from the psychic backlash or the radiation. The world was saved from the tyranny of shadows, only to be introduced to the tyranny of absolute power. Tanjiro passed out his body, finally giving up. Nezuko held him crying silent tears. Zenitsu stared at the retreating back of the monster, shaking uncontrollably. Inosuke sat in the dirt, his swords lying forgotten. He had seen the peak of strength, and he knew he could never reach it. The hierarchy of the world had been dismantled. The sun set on the Taisho-era and rose on a new age, the age of the Hulk. But the radiation remained. The soil of Tokyo glowed in the dark. The legacy of the crossover was written in the isotopes that would poison the land for generations. The image of a single flower, a blue spider lily growing in the radioactive footprint of the Hulk. It bloomed, rapidly twisted by the energy turning from blue to a vibrant radioactive green. The impossible flower had finally been found, but there was no one left to harvest it. The multiversal outcome was cemented. The timeline was severed from the original path. There would be no modern Japan as history knew it. There would be a quarantined island, a land of monsters and radiation, and the few warriors who stayed behind to guard the rest of the world from what they had created. The rhythmic clicking of the Geiger counters carried by the approaching international relief ships, who had no idea what they were sailing into. 3 months had passed since the sun set on the Taisho-era and rose on something nameless and toxic. The map of Japan had been redrawn not by cartographers, but by the ticking of Geiger counters and the boundaries of survival. Tokyo was no longer the capital. It was the zone. A vast circular graveyard extending 20 miles from the epicenter of the Ryunkaku ruins, enclosed by a perimeter of scorched earth and hastily erected barriers. The air inside the zone shimmered with a permanent green haze, a visible soup of ionized radiation and lingering demon magic that defied the laws of meteorology. No rain fell there. The clouds that drifted over the city evaporated instantly, leaving the sky a stark, bruised purple. Outside the perimeter, the world had descended into a terrified quarantine. The imperial government had fled to Kyoto, leaving the wreckage of the East to the only force capable of navigating it, the remnants of the Demon Slayer Corps. They were no longer hunters of shadows. They were scavengers of the apocalypse, wearing heavy lead-lined cloaks over their uniforms, their breathing techniques adapted not for power, but for filtration. The total concentration breathing that once allowed them to surpass human limits was now the only thing keeping their lungs from liquefying. Tanjiro Kamado stood on a ridge overlooking the submerged ruins of the Koto ward. He leaned heavily on a cane made from the same black bone material that had erupted from the Hulk's body during the transformation. His hair had turned white, not from age, but from the stress of the cellular degradation that plagued every survivor of the Tokyo event. Beside him, Kanao Tsuyuri adjusted the valves on her gas mask. She did not speak. There was little left to say. The silence of the new world was different. It was not the peaceful silence of nature, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a tomb. Below them, in the flooded streets, something moved. It was not a fish, and it was not a man. It was a remnant of the demon population that had survived the death of Muzan. When the Hulk crushed the Demon King, the psychic backlash had lobotomized the remaining demons, severing their connection to a central consciousness. But the radiation had mutated them. These were not the calculated sadists of the 12 Kazuki. These were Gamma Oni, mindless, cancerous beasts of muscle and tumor that glowed in the dark and fed on radiation. They did not need to eat flesh anymore. They ate the land itself, chewing on the radioactive debris, absorbing the isotopes to fuel their endless regeneration. Tanjiro watched the creature drag itself onto a rooftop. It looked like a lump of melted wax with teeth. He drew his sword. The blade was new, forged from the wreckage of the foreign ships that had tried to approach the coast and failed. It was a dull grey metal that did not reflect light. He didn't want to kill it. He felt a profound pity for the thing. It was a victim of a war between gods it did not understand. But pity was a luxury of the old world. If the Gamma Oni migrated out of the zone, they would spread the contagion. Kanao moved first, using a variation of flower breathing that was stripped of all grace and focused entirely on efficiency. She decapitated the beast in a single stroke. The body did not turn to ash. That was the other curse. Without Muzan's magic, the demons did not dissolve. They rotted. Their carcasses became radioactive hotspots that poisoned the soil for decades. Tanjiro signaled for the cleanup crew. Men in heavy rubber suits emerged from the shadows, carrying lime and lead containers. This was the new war, a war of sanitation. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, the water boiled. The Japan Trench, one of the deepest points on Earth, had become a thermal vent of catastrophic proportions. The Hulk was down there. He had not moved in 90 days. He sat on the ocean floor, surrounded by the crushing pressure of 6 miles of water. The pressure that would have imploded a submarine felt like a weighted blanket to him. It was comforting. It held him together. The water around him flashed into steam, instantly creating a superheated bubble that kept the ocean at bay. He was hibernating. The dual nature of his existence, the Banner Mind and the Hulk Mind, had reached a temporary ceasefire born of exhaustion. But the energy he emitted did not sleep. The Pacific Ocean was warming. Currents were shifting. Fish were dying by the billions, washing up on the shores of California and Hawaii, with their eyes melted and their scales glowing. The world was screaming, but the Hulk covered his ears. The international community could no longer ignore the anomaly. The blockade around Japan was enforced by a coalition of American, British, and French navies. They kept their distance, afraid of the green death that drifted on the wind. But fear eventually gave way to arrogance. A decision was made in the war rooms of the West. The creature was dormant. It was a biological weapon sitting on the shelf. If it could not be captured, it had to be destroyed before it woke up. A massive operation was launched. The USS Prometheus, a prototype battleship armed with experimental depth charges loaded with chemical agents, sailed toward the coordinates of the thermal anomaly. They did not contact the Japanese government. They did not consult the Demon Slayer Corps. They saw a problem, and they applied the hammer of modern military doctrine. Tanjiro received the news from a sparrow that flew erratically, its feathers falling out from radiation exposure. Zenitsu Agatsuma, now the head of the intelligence network that replaced the crows, deciphered the message. His hands shook as he read the Morse code. The foreigners were going to bomb the trench. They were going to drop high-explosive ordnance directly onto the sleeping god. Zenitsu looked at Tanjiro with terror in his eyes. He knew what the foreigners didn't. You don't wake the dragon. You don't poke the demon. If they attacked the Hulk, they wouldn't kill him. They would annoy him. And a Hulk, who was annoyed at the bottom of the ocean, would not stay at the bottom of the ocean. He would come up. And if he came up with the momentum of the deep sea behind him, he would generate a tsunami that would wipe the remaining population of Japan off the map. The decision was made instantly. The Slayer Corps had to stop the Saviors. They had to intercept the American fleet and prevent the attack. It was a suicide mission. They had no navy. They had no air force. They only had a few retrofitted fishing boats and the desperate courage of people who had already seen the end of the world. Inosuke Hashira led the boarding party. He stood on the prow of the lead boat, wearing a suit of armor made from the carapace of a giant crab he had wrestled in the radioactive bay. He screamed at the ocean, daring the waves to fight him. He was the only one who seemed to thrive in this new age. The chaos suited him. The survival of the fittest was a game he knew how to play. The confrontation took place 10 miles off the coast. The Slayer boats, small and ragged, cut across the path of the massive steel battleship. The American captain looked through his binoculars in disbelief. He saw men with swords standing on wooden decks, demanding he turn back. He ordered a warning shot. The shell splashed harmlessly into the water. But the vibration traveled. It traveled down through the miles of dark water. It reached the bubble of steam at the bottom of the trench. The Hulk opened his eyes. The eyes were no longer green. They were a void of absolute black surrounded by a corona of purple fire. The Hulk stood up. The ocean floor cracked. He bent his knees and pushed off. The displacement of water was equivalent to a volcanic eruption. On the surface, the sea bulged. A dome of water rose, lifting the Slayer boats and the battleship alike. The panic was instantaneous. The American sailors scrambled for their stations, but gravity was already failing them. The dome collapsed and the Hulk breached. He did not look like a man anymore. He was a leviathan. He was covered in barnacles and coral that had grown and calcified in the radioactive heat. Seaweed hung from his bone spikes like a ragged shroud. He hovered in the air for a second, defying physics through sheer upward momentum, and then he crashed down onto the deck of the USS Prometheus. The steel of the ship, which was the pride of the Navy, crumpled like wet cardboard. The Hulk roared. It was a wet, gurgling sound that cleared his lungs of the ocean and replaced it with the air of the surface. The sound waves shattered the glass on the bridge and ruptured the eardrums of every sailor on board. Inosuke saw the beast and laughed. It was a hysterical, terrified laugh. He launched himself from his boat using his breathing technique to jump the gap of churning water. He landed on the tilting deck of the battleship. He didn't attack the hulk. He attacked the gun turrets. He slashed at the hydraulic lines disabling the cannons. He knew that if the ship fired, if they escalated, the hulk would obliterate everything. Tanjiro followed, launching himself with a blast of water, breathing that was dark and sludge-heavy. He landed in front of the hulk. He threw his sword down. He raised his hands. The hulk stopped smashing the ship. He looked at the small, white-haired boy. He remembered the smell of sorrow, the smell of the needle. The hulk growled a low, rumbling warning. He pointed at the horizon. He wanted them to leave. He wanted the noise to stop. But the American captain, recovering from the shock, drew his sidearm and fired. The bullet hit the hulk in the eye. It didn't penetrate. It flattened and fell. But the insult was registered. The hulk turned to the bridge. He raised a fist that was the size of a carriage. Tanjiro screamed. He didn't scream a command. He screamed a plea to the spirit that he knew was watching. He screamed to the ghost of Rengoku, to the ghost of his family. He begged for a miracle. And the miracle came not from the heavens, but from the hell they had created. Nezuko Kamado stepped out from the shadows of the ruined superstructure. She was not in her box. She was walking in the sun. Her skin was patterned with vine-like markings that glowed with the same purple energy as the hulk. She had absorbed the fallout. She had adapted. She was a child of the new radiation. She walked up to the hulk. The radiation coming off him was enough to melt steel, but she walked through it. Her skin blistered and healed in real time. She reached up and took the hulk's massive hand. The hulk looked down. He saw the girl. He felt the heat of her hand. It was the same heat as his. She was not afraid. She was not attacking. She was kin. The rage in the hulk's eyes faltered. The black void shrank, revealing the confused green irises. He looked at the destruction he had caused. The sinking ship, the screaming men, the boy with the white hair. He felt tired, so incredibly tired. The ocean was too loud. The land was too loud. There was nowhere to go. Then the sky broke open, not with a storm, but with a presence. The spirits of the Hashira who had died in the conflict, Kiyome, Shinobu, Muichiro, Mitsuri, Obanai, manifested not as ghosts but as shimmering heat hazes in the radioactive air. They were part of the energy field now. They swirled around the hulk, creating a barrier of wind and sound. They whispered to him. They didn't tell him to leave. They told him to rest. They told him that he did not have to fight. The hulk looked at the spirits. He recognized the big crying man. He recognized the butterfly woman. He grunted. He understood. He turned away from the ship. He turned toward the mainland, toward the smoking crater of Mount Fuji, which had been dormant for centuries. He walked off the ship, stepping onto the water. He didn't sink. He walked on the surface, the heat of his feet turning the water to steam, creating a path of clouds. He walked away from the battle, away from the humans. He headed for the mountain. The aftermath was a slow, agonizing realization of the new reality. The hulk took residence inside the crater of Mount Fuji. The heat of his body reactivated the volcano, but instead of lava, it spewed plumes of radioactive green ash. The mountain became his throne, his prison, and his tomb. He sat there, visible from Tokyo, a constant reminder of the day the world changed. The Japan that existed before was gone. The island was declared a global exclusion zone. The survivors were moved to the southern islands or emigrated. But the Demon Slayer Corps stayed. They transformed from a secret society into the guardians of the perimeter. They built a fortress at the base of the mountain. Their duty was no longer to hunt demons, but to ensure that no one disturbed the sleeping god. Tanjiro Kamado lived out his days as the commander of the watch. He never married. He never had children. His body was too broken, his DNA too scrambled by the proximity to the beast. He spent his evenings on the wall looking up at the green glow of the mountain, drinking tea that tasted of metal. Zenitsu wrote the history of the event. He wrote it in a book bound in lead. He titled it The Age of Giants. He chronicled the fall of the samurai and the rise of the atom. He wrote about the tragedy of Bruce Banner, the man who brought the sun to the earth and burned his hands. Inosuke disappeared into the zone. He became a legend among the scavengers, a ghost who hunted the Gamma Oni with bare hands and lived in the wild, embracing the monstrous nature of the new world. Nezuko remained young. The radiation had halted her aging completely. She became the priestess of the mountain, the only one allowed to walk the path up to the crater. Once a year, on the anniversary of the arrival, she would climb the peak. She would sit beside the massive slumbering form of the Hulk. She would not speak. She would just sit. And sometimes the Hulk would open one eye and look at her. And in that look, there was no rage, only a shared understanding of what it meant to be a monster that the world could not forgive. The final convergence was not a battle, but a stalemate. The anime world and the comic world had not blended. They had collided and left a scar. The power systems had unified into a grim physics where every action had a radioactive reaction. The what if had become a what is. The story ended not with a hero's journey completed, but with a world enduring. 50 years later, a team of scientists from a rebuilt United Nations received permission to enter the zone. They wore suits that looked like spaceships. They drove vehicles shielded against the sun. They drove through the ruins of Tokyo, which had been reclaimed by a jungle of neon-colored vegetation. Trees with blue leaves and flowers that hummed with energy. It was beautiful and deadly. They reached the base of the mountain. They met an old woman with eyes that burned like embers. She led them to the observation post. The lead scientist adjusted his telescope. He looked into the crater. He expected to see a monster. He expected to see the Hulk. But what he saw made him drop his notebook. The Hulk was there, but he was not alone. The crater was filled with flowers. Millions of blue spider lilies. They grew from the Hulk's skin. They grew from the rock. They filled the caldera with a sea of azure light. The creature had finally found the cure, not by science, but by becoming the source. The radiation had mutated the soil, and the traces of the serum in his blood had birthed the legendary flower in abundance. The scientist asked the old woman what it meant. Nezuko smiled a smile that was both human and demon ancient and ageless. She said it meant that even in the heart of destruction, life finds a way to be strange. She looked up at the green sky. The Hulk shifted in his sleep, and the mountain rumbled. A puff of green smoke rose, forming a ring that hung over the silent radioactive land. The scientist asked if he would ever wake up. Nezuko turned back to the path leading down to the fortress, where the banners of the Demon Slayer Corps still flew ragged and grey. "He is awake," she said softly. "He is just dreaming of a world where he is not broken. And as long as we let him dream we survive, that is the bargain." The camera pulled back from the mountain, back from the jungle ruins of Tokyo, back across the ocean, where the ship still patrolled the perimeter. It showed the globe, a blue marble with a bright glowing green scar on its eastern hemisphere, a permanent mark, a reminder. The story closed on the sound of a heartbeat, slow, heavy, eternal, thump, thump, thump. The heartbeat of the world's strongest rage finally at rest. The file is designated Omega 77, recovered from the deep archives of the defunct SHIELD organization. It serves as the final entry in the observation log of the Japanese exclusion zone. The drone footage, dated nearly a century after the event, confirms that the quarantine is still absolute. The city of Tokyo remains a lush, verdant ruin, where the flora has outpaced the aggressive radiation. The buildings are draped in thick vines that pulse with a faint internal light, a reminder of the energy that still permeates the water table. There are no humans in the city. The descendants of the survivors live in the floating habitats off the coast of Kyushu, forever watching the eastern horizon. The world did not forget the lesson of the Green Calamity. The development of nuclear weapons in the West was halted not by treaty, but by terror. The superpowers realized that splitting the atom did not just create an explosion, it beckoned a god. The Cold War never happened because the world was too busy looking at the sleeping giant into the Pacific Rim. The science of the era shifted. Biology and physics merged into a new discipline known as gamma theology, the study of the divine consequences of radiation. The Demon Slayer Corps does not exist in history books. They were erased, their sacrifice deemed too terrifying for the public to understand. Instead, they exist as a myth, a folklore of white-haired warriors who guard the gates of hell. The only physical proof of their existence is the Agatsuma Chronicle, a handwritten journal encased in lead that sits in the deepest vault of the United Nations. It tells the story of the boy who carried the sun and the beast who ate it. In the center of the exclusion zone, the readings are stable. The thermal vent at Mount Fuji releases a steady, rhythmic pulse of heat. It is not volcanic activity. It is respiration. The satellite imaging shows the heat signature clearly. A massive, curled shape deep within the mountain's throat. It hasn't moved in decades, but every seismograph on Earth registers the heartbeat. It serves as a planetary clock, a countdown that has been paused but never stopped. The final page of the dossier contains a single grainy photograph taken by a daring scavenger who breached the perimeter years ago. It shows the entrance to the crater temple. Sitting there is a figure small and unmoving, draped in a kimono, that has not rotted, protected by the same energy that destroyed the world. She is waiting. The file ends with a handwritten note from the Director of Containment. It reads simply, "We do not wake him. We do not test him. We pray that his dream lasts longer than our civilization." The crossover did not end with a winner. It ended with a warning etched into the geography of the Earth. There are doors that should never be opened, and there are angers that should never be found. The Hulk sleeps, and the world tiptoes around the bed, hoping the floorboards don't creak.